This is the brief on the Philippines Anti-Financial Account Scamming Act. Republic Act 12,010, or AFASA, is a powerful new law designed to crush digital financial scams by penalizing cybercriminals and forcing banks to actively protect your accounts. To see how this cleans up the digital Wild West, we're going to look at who it targets, how it arms the banks, and the unprecedented powers given to the government. First, let's talk crimes. The law targets social engineering, tricking people for passwords, and money muling, which is moving dirty money. Money mules are basically the digital getaway drivers for cyber syndicates. If 3 or more people do this or use mass mailers, it's economic sabotage, meaning life in prison and huge fines. So how does the law stop them from getting the cash? Second, bank responsibilities. Institutions must use robust fraud management and multi-factor authentication. They can legally freeze suspicious funds for up to 30 days. Now, a 30-day freeze sounds super frustrating for an innocent user, right? But it's the heavy-handed trade-off required to stop fraud in its tracks. Crucially, if bank security fails, they're liable and must refund you. Banks can freeze money, but how do authorities catch the scammers? Finally, let's look at the government's unprecedented new powers. The central bank can now investigate accounts and apply for cybercrime warrants. This is a literal game changer because it explicitly bypasses the Philippines' notoriously strict bank secrecy laws. The law also grants criminal immunity to human trafficking victims forced into these syndicates. Ultimately, AFASA gives regulators serious teeth to hunt down digital scammers while holding banks directly accountable for keeping your money safe.
This video will provide an overview of the Anti-Financial Account Scamming Act, or Republic Act, number 12,010. We will cover how the law defines the crimes, mandates defenses, and enforces penalties for financial account scamming. The state recognizes the vital role of digital finance and mandates strict regulation to protect the public. The primary goal is to promote awareness and prevent the use of accounts for fraudulent activities, protecting the digital economy. One of the prohibited acts is money muling, defined in Section 4A. This includes using or opening financial accounts with fictitious names, marketing these accounts by buying, selling, or lending them, and recruiting others to perform these acts. Another key prohibited act is social engineering, as defined in Section 4B. This involves obtaining sensitive identifying information through deception or fraud to gain unauthorized access. Methods include misrepresenting oneself as an institution or using electronic communications to solicit credentials. The crime escalates to economic sabotage when committed by a syndicate against 3 or more persons, using a mass mailer for 50 or more recipients, or through human trafficking. Economic sabotage carries the severe penalty of life imprisonment. Section 6 covers institutional responsibility, mandating that institutions employ risk management systems, such as multi-factor authentication and fraud management systems, proportionate to their operational complexity. Institutions compliant with these requirements shall not be liable for losses arising from scams, a provision known as the safe harbor. Section 7 grants the authority to freeze, allowing institutions to temporarily hold disputed funds for up to 30 calendar days. Triggers for freezing include unusual transaction behavior, lack of clear economic purpose, unknown or illegal sources, or facilitation via social engineering. Institutions must promptly notify the BSP. Section 8 introduces coordinated verification. Upon detection or complaint, institutions must initiate verification. During this process, laws such as the Bank Secrecy Law, the Foreign Currency Deposit Act, and the Data Privacy Act do not apply. Section 12 outlines the BSP investigatory powers. The BSP has the authority to investigate accounts involved in prohibited acts without a court order. No court can stop the BSP from exercising this authority. Bank employees are granted immunity for complying with BSP investigation orders. Sections 6 and 9 address liability and restitution. If an institution fails to employ adequate systems or exercise highest diligence, they are liable for restitution of funds to the account owner. Conviction of the scammer is not a prerequisite for restitution. Failure to freeze funds when required also triggers liability. Section 16 sets out the penalty matrix for criminal consequences. Money mulling carries 6 to 8 years imprisonment and a fine of 100K to 500,000 Philippine pesos. Social engineering results in 10 to 12 years imprisonment and a fine of 50K to 1 million Philippine pesos. Economic sabotage is punishable by life imprisonment and a fine of 1M to 5 million Philippine pesos. Sections 16B and 20 provide protections for vulnerable groups. If the target of social engineering is a senior citizen, the penalty increases to 12 to 14 years imprisonment. Victims of human trafficking forced to be mules are free from criminal liability, even if the trafficker is not yet convicted. Section 17 introduces civil forfeiture, or asset seizure. Independent of the criminal case, all properties, tools, and instruments used for the commission of the act are subject to forfeiture. In cases of economic sabotage, rules allow summary procedures to release assets early for victim protection. Sections 13, 14, and 23 establish an enforcement ecosystem of interagency collaboration. The BSP can apply for cybercrime warrants and is authorized to share account information with law enforcement agencies like the NBI, PNP, DOJ, and AMLC for prosecution. The Act also mandates coordination between the private sector and the government. RA 12010 aims for a fortified financial system. For the public, it offers enhanced protection for senior citizens and account owners. For institutions, it provides clear mandates for MFA and FMS and a safe harbor for compliance. For criminals, it ensures life imprisonment for sabotage and asset forfeiture. The Act shifts the burden of security from the user to the system.
All right, let's talk about something that's probably on everyone's mind these days: keeping your money safe. There's a brand new law out there designed to build a kind of digital fortress around your finances. And honestly, with scams getting sneakier every single day, this might just be the most important protection you hear about all year.
I mean, we've all gotten them, right? Those texts or emails that pop up and just feel wrong. A surprise lottery win, a scary warning about your bank account, a link that looks just a little bit off. Yep. Those are the tools of the trade for modern scammers, and they are absolutely everywhere.
Well, it looks like a powerful new shield has just been put in place. The official name is Republic Act number 1210, but everyone's calling it by its much catchier name, AFASA. So what exactly does this new shield do for you and me? Let's break it down.
Okay, so first things first. AFSA gets super clear on what actually counts as a financial scam. For the first time, it really defines the specific crimes we all need to watch out for to keep ourselves safe.
So what's the first big thing this law goes after? It's a practice called money muling. You know, basically, this is when someone lets their bank account or e-wallet be used as a temporary stop for stolen money. They become the middleman, helping to move that dirty cash around and making it a real nightmare for authorities to track.
And you might be wondering, what exactly does a money mule do? Well, the law is very specific about this. If you sell or even just lend your account to someone or rent it out for some quick cash, that's now a crime. Same goes for opening an account with fake info, and here's a really important part. AFSA also makes it illegal to recruit other people to become money mules.
All right, the second major crime is probably what you think of when you hear the word scam. It's called social engineering. This is basically the art of deception. You know, the fake texts, the phishing emails, those phone calls from someone pretending to be from your bank. They're all designed to do one thing: trick you into giving up your passwords and bank details.
So, to make it really simple, think of it like this. The social engineer is the mastermind, the one who plans and pulls off the whole heist. The money mule? They're the digital getaway driver. They might not have planned the crime, but they are absolutely essential for helping the criminal escape with the cash. And now, both of them are in some serious trouble.
But wait, the law takes this even further. Under certain conditions, these scams can be upgraded to economic sabotage, and that is a much, much more serious crime. This happens if it's a group effort, if they target multiple victims, if they use tools to blast out messages to tons of people, or if the scam is tied to something as horrible as human trafficking.
So the law is clear on the crimes, but it doesn't just stop with the criminals. What about the banks and the e-wallets that hold our money? Well, AFSA gives them a whole new set of responsibilities, and that's what we're going to get into next.
Under this new law, your bank or e-wallet company has to seriously level up its security game. They are now required to have things like multi-factor authentication. You know, that thing where you get a code sent to your phone before you can log in. They also need to have automated systems that can spot and shut down fraud as it's happening. And this next part is a real game changer. Banks have a powerful new tool. If a transaction looks fishy, they can now put an immediate temporary hold on the money. You can think of it like a rapid response button that stops the scammers in their tracks before the money vanishes forever.
But this power isn't endless. The law is very specific here. A bank can only hold these disputed funds for up to 30 days without getting a court order. This gives them a crucial window to investigate what's going on, but it also means your money isn't locked up forever without a good reason.
So what exactly counts as disputed? Well, the law itself tells us. If a transaction seems unusual, if it has no clear economic purpose, or if it looks like it's coming from an illegal source, that gives the bank the green light to hit the pause button.
Okay, now for the part that the scammers are really going to hate, because a law is only as strong as its teeth, right? And believe me, AFASA has some very, very sharp teeth.
Let's just look at these numbers. If you're caught being a money mule, you could face up to 8 years in prison. For the social engineers, the ones doing the actual tricking, that jumps to 12 years. And for anyone committing economic sabotage, we're talking life imprisonment and a fine up to 5 million pesos. The message here couldn't be clearer. The risk is just not worth the reward anymore.
And the law makes sure to give extra protection to our most vulnerable community members. If a scammer specifically goes after a senior citizen, the penalties get even tougher. We're talking up to 14 years behind bars and a fine that can hit 2 million pesos. So, we've gone over the crimes, the duties of the banks, and the serious penalties. Now, let's bring it all home and talk about what this new law really means for you. Think of this as your new financial armor. So let's boil it all down to 4 key things you need to remember. First, and this is the big one, never, ever, ever sell, rent, or lend your bank account to anyone, period. Second, expect to see stronger security from your bank. Embrace it, because it's there to protect you. Third, remember your bank now has more responsibility to keep you safe. And finally, if anything feels off, report it right away. Your bank now has the power to act much faster.
At the end of the day, this new law gives all of us, and our banks, the tools we need to fight back. But you know what? The most powerful tool of all is still awareness. So the real question isn't just if you're ready to spot the next scam, but if we're all ready to make our digital world a whole lot safer, together.
You know that feeling, right? It's almost a Pavlovian response at this point for all of us.
Yeah.
You're sitting there, maybe having a nice dinner, or
just about to drift off to sleep.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just relaxing, and suddenly your phone goes ding.
The absolute universal sound of modern anxiety.
It really is. And for a split second, your heart just it just stops. You look down expecting a text from a friend or maybe a meme from your brother, but instead it's a notification from your banking app. Thank you for your purchase of 20,000 pesos.
And your stomach just completely drops to the floor. It's that specific cocktail of panic and confusion and just total helplessness.
Because you didn't buy anything. You haven't been anywhere. Or maybe it's not a transaction yet. Maybe it's that text message that looks so real, asking for an OTP to quote-unquote verify your account, and for a split second your thumb just hovers over the link. I mean, we live in this constant state of low-level digital siege.
Yeah, we really do. It is essentially the background radiation of the modern financial age. I mean, we have the entire global economy in our pockets, which is incredibly convenient, but it also means we have a massive digital target painted on our backs 24 hours a day.
Well, today we are taking a deep dive into something that aims to change that dynamic completely. We aren't just complaining about spam texts today. We are looking at a piece of legislation that is basically a declaration of war against those exact moments of panic. We are talking about Republic Act 12-2010.
Right, formerly known as the Anti-Financial Account Scamming Act, or as the industry tends to call it, AFASA.
AFASA. It sounds like a superhero team, doesn't it?
It kind of does,
And
yeah.
honestly, based on the source material we've been combing through, which is the full text of the act enacted back in July 2024, it kind of tries to be one for our bank accounts.
Okay.
Because this isn't just a dry legal document we're looking at today. This acts as a direct response to the absolute explosion of digital financial services and inevitably the cybercriminals who have been exploiting them.
It really is a watershed moment for the country. If you actually look at the Declaration of Policy in Section 2, the state effectively admits that the old rules just don't work anymore. They admit that while digital banking is vital, the public is essentially being hunted. The law explicitly says there is a need to protect the public from cybercriminals and criminal syndicates who target financial accounts.
So our mission for this deep dive is to decode this law. We have the full text of the act right in front of us, and we are going to break down how it changes the game for everyone, the scammers, the banks, and you, the everyday account owner.
We definitely have a lot to get through because this law is dense. We need to define the specific new crimes it creates, things like money muling and social engineering.
Which are terms we hear all the time, but the law defines them in very specific and honestly slightly scary ways.
Correct. Then we need to talk about the massive shift in responsibility. And spoiler alert here, banks are now on the hook for security in a way they absolutely weren't before.
That is a huge one. Plus, we'll look at the superpowers given to the central bank to investigate, and finally, the penalties. And when I say penalties, I mean we are talking about life imprisonment for something called economic sabotage.
It is very serious business.
So let's just jump right in. Section 1 creates the Anti-Financial Account Scamming Act. But the real meat starts when we look at the new criminal landscape. The law introduces specific definitions for crimes that until now might have been a bit gray or just handled under older, outdated laws. The first big one is money muling.
Right. This is Section 4A. Now, when most people hear the term money mule, they might think of someone physically carrying bags of cash across a border. But in the digital age and under this specific act, it is much more subtle and honestly much more common.
So how does the law actually define it?
Well, Section 4A defines a money mule not necessarily as the mastermind of the operation, but as a person who performs acts for the purpose of receiving, transferring, or withdrawing proceeds that are known to be derived from crimes. It's really all about managing the flow of dirty money.
Okay, managing the flow. But what does that look like in practice? Like what acts are actually illegal now under this?
The law is very specific here. It lists 5 distinct acts. The first one is simply using, borrowing, or allowing the use of a financial account.
Allowing the use. So if I just let my friend use my bank account to receive a transfer, because maybe he doesn't have one.
Yes.
Am I a money mule?
If you know that money is coming from a social engineering scheme or a crime, then yes, absolutely. The law is trying to close the loop on people who say, oh, I didn't steal the money, I just let someone transfer it to me and then I withdrew it for them. That excuse is completely gone now.
Well, okay. What else?
Item number 2 is opening a financial account under a fictitious name or using the identity or identification documents of another. So identity theft for the purpose of banking is now explicitly part of this money muling definition.
That tracks. I mean, if you're hiding who you are, you're probably up to no good.
Exactly. Then we have items 3 and 4, which are fascinating because they target the actual market for these accounts. It is now illegal to buy or rent a financial account, and equally illegal to sell or lend a financial account.
Buying and selling accounts. You actually see this on social media sometimes, right? Like posts saying, we pay cash for your verified e-wallet account.
Precisely. And that is exactly what this law is targeting. You have people, maybe students or people in financial distress who think, hey, I'll just verify this e-wallet, sell the login details for 500 pesos and walk away. This law says, no, you are now part of the chain. You are selling a tool that will be used for crime.
That is a crucial distinction. It completely stops people from claiming ignorance. If you sell your account, you are liable.
And the 5th item in Section 4A is the one that catches the organizers. It criminalizes recruiting, enlisting, contracting, hiring, utilizing, or inducing any person to perform the acts mentioned. So the person posting that ad on social media saying, looking for account holders, they are committing a crime right there.
It effectively targets the middlemen. The people who might not be the actual hackers stealing the passwords, but they are the logistics managers moving the money around.
Correct. It attacks the infrastructure of the scam. Because you can steal all the money you want, but if you have nowhere to put it, the scam fails. AFASA basically tries to burn down the places they put the money.
That makes a lot of sense. Now let's flip to the other side of the coin, the actual start of the scam. Section 4B, which covers social engineering.
Right. This is a term the security industry has used for years, but seeing it codified into Philippine law is highly significant. Section 4B defines a social engineering scheme as obtaining sensitive identifying information of another person through deception or fraud.
Sensitive identifying information. I'm assuming that's clearly defined somewhere in Section 3.
It is. Section 3I, to be exact. It includes usernames, passwords, bank account details, credit card info, e-wallet information, and other electronic credentials. Basically the keys to your financial kingdom.
So social engineering is basically the act of tricking me into giving you those keys.
Yes. And the law breaks it down into specific acts again. Number one is misrepresenting oneself as acting on behalf of an institution.
Oh, the classic. Hello, this is fraud department of your bank calling.
Exactly. If you make that call and you aren't actually from the bank, you have committed social engineering under AFASA. It doesn't even matter if you succeed in stealing the money yet. The mere act of misrepresentation to get the info is the crime.
That is a subtle but really powerful shift. You're criminalizing the method itself.
And the second part of Section 4B covers using electronic communications to obtain another person's sensitive identifying information.
Which brings us back to Section 3B for a second. Okay. The definition of electronic communications. The law is pretty broad here, isn't it?
Extremely broad. It covers phone calls, SMS, social media messages, email, instant messaging. Basically, any way a signal can move from one device to another. If you use technology to fish for passwords, you are on the hook.
So we have money muling, which handles the cash flow, and social engineering, which handles the data theft. But then the law takes a turn into something that sounds like it belongs in a spy movie. Economic sabotage.
Yes. This is Section 4C, and this is where the law really bears its teeth. It recognizes that there is a massive difference between a lone wolf scammer trying to make a quick buck and a sophisticated syndicate that is attacking the population at scale.
How does the law distinguish between a quote-unquote regular scammer and someone committing economic sabotage? Because the name alone implies you're trying to take down the entire economy.
It does imply that. Section 4C states that the prohibited acts, so the muling or the social engineering, become economic sabotage when they are committed under very specific circumstances.
Because what are the criteria?
There are 4 triggers. And you only need one of these to upgrade the crime to sabotage. First, if it is committed by a group of 3 or more persons conspiring together.
Just 3 people. That's a very small syndicate.
It is. A small cell of scammers, say a caller, a tech guy, and a money handler. That's 3. That's economic sabotage.
Wow. Okay. What's the second trigger?
If it is committed against 3 or more persons individually or as a group.
Again, the threshold is so low. If I send a scam text to you, my brother, and my neighbor, I've committed economic sabotage.
Theoretically, yes. The law is strictly designed to catch anyone operating on a pattern, not just a one-off incident.
That is intense. What about the third one?
Using a mass mailer.
And we should probably check the definition on that one. Section 3G, right?
Right. A mass mailer is defined as a service or software used to send electronic communications to an aggregate of 50 or more recipients.
50? That's it. I mean, 50 seems incredibly low for a mass mailer. Spam campaigns usually hit thousands or tens of thousands.
It is low, and I think that's entirely intentional. It casts a very wide net. If you are blasting out a phishing link to 51 numbers, you aren't just a nuisance anymore. In the eyes of the law, you are a saboteur.
And the fourth circumstance.
If the act is committed through human trafficking, this acknowledges the really sad reality that many scam centers are staffed by people who are forced to be there against their will.
We will definitely touch on the victims of trafficking later, but for the organizers, using traffic labor automatically bumps the charge to economic sabotage. Now, why does this label matter so much? Is it just a scary name to put on a rap sheet?
It matters entirely because of Section 16, the penalty.
Lay it on us.
Life imprisonment.
Life imprisonment for sending scam texts to 50 people.
Life imprisonment and a fine ranging from 1 million to 5 million pesos.
That is just astronomical.
It is the absolute nuclear option. The legislators are treating these scam syndicates not just as thieves, but as literal threats to the stability of the financial system. Because if people lose faith in digital banking because they're constantly being scammed, the whole economy suffers, hence sabotage.
It's basically treating scammers like terrorists or organized crime lords. The stakes have been raised so incredibly high.
It radically changes the risk-reward calculation for the criminals, or at least that is the hope of the lawmakers.
So that extensively covers the criminals. But what about the institutions? The banks, the e-wallets? For a long time, the general feeling has been that if you get scammed, the bank just says, sorry, you clicked the link, it's your fault.
Yeah.
Does AFASA change that dynamic?
This is Section 6, and this is probably the part of the law that will affect your daily life the most. The section is literally titled Responsibility to Protect Access to Clients' Financial Account.
Responsibility, that's a strong word for a bank.
It is a strict mandate. Institutions must have adequate risk management systems. The law specifically names technologies they need to use, like multi-factor authentication or MFA and fraud management systems, which they call FMS.
We all know MFA, right? The OTPs, the face scans.
Yeah.
But FMS, fraud management systems.
Section 3E defines FMS as automated and real-time monitoring and detection systems to identify and block disputed, suspicious, or other online transactions.
Real time. So the bank's computer needs to be actively watching as the transaction happens and say, wait, that looks weird, and physically block it.
Exactly. And here is the real kicker in Section 6. If an institution fails to have these systems or fails to exercise the highest degree of diligence, they are liable.
Liable for what exactly?
Restitution. Section 6 explicitly states institutions shall be liable for restitution of funds to the account owners for failure to employ adequate risk management systems and controls.
Wait, let me just unpack this. If I get scammed and it turns out the bank didn't have a good enough fraud management system to catch it, the bank has to pay me back.
Yes. And get this, the law clearly says conviction shall not be a prerequisite to the restitution of funds.
Whoa. So we don't need to catch the scammer, put them on trial, and wait 10 years for a verdict before I get my money back.
That is the direct implication, yes. It's a civil liability placed on the bank for their own failure to protect you, independent of any criminal case against the scammer.
That is a massive aha moment for anyone listening. It puts a financial gun to the head of these institutions. They have to upgrade their security, or they will literally go broke paying restitution to everyone who gets scammed.
It perfectly aligns their incentives with yours. Previously, the financial loss was entirely yours. Now the loss could very well be theirs. But there is a safe harbor clause we need to mention.
There's always a catch, isn't there?
Well, it says that if the BSP, the Bangko Sentral in Pilipinas, determines the institution was compliant and did everything right, meaning they had the MFA, they had the FMS, they exercised diligence, then they are not liable for the loss.
Okay, so it's not a blanket money-back guarantee for every single scam. If the bank has top-tier security and I still willingly hand over my password to a fake website,
then the bank can say, look, we built the wall, we locked the gate, and you threw the keys over the fence. In that specific case, they are safe, but the heavy burden is on them to prove they had those robust systems in place.
this really helps explain why our banking apps are getting so strict lately, why we have to constantly scan our IDs, scan our faces, verify email, verify phone numbers. The banks are terrified of this Section 6 liability.
Precisely. The friction you feel, all those extra annoying steps, that is the bank building its defense under Section 6.
Speaking of friction, let's talk about what happens when that fraud management system actually kicks in. Section 7, which covers the authority to hold funds.
This is what we can call the kill switch. Section 7 gives institutions the outright authority to temporarily hold funds subject to a disputed transaction.
For how long can they hold it?
Up to 30 calendar days, and it can even be extended by a court if necessary.
30 days. Just imagine you're trying to pay your rent or an emergency medical bill, and your funds get held for a month. What actually triggers this? Can they just do it whenever they feel like it?
No, the law lists specific triggers. A transaction is considered disputed if there is reasonable ground to believe it is unusual, without clear economic purpose from an unknown or illegal source, or facilitated through social engineering.
Unusual and without clear economic purpose. That leaves a whole lot of room for interpretation by the AI, doesn't it?
It really does. And the law explicitly allows this belief to arise from a finding under the bank's own FMS. So yes, an algorithm can flag your entirely normal transaction as unusual and freeze the funds just like that.
And if the algorithm is wrong, if it freezes my legitimate hard-earned money, can I sue the bank for the hassle?
Section 7 says, no administrative, criminal, or civil liability shall be imposed against an institution for holding funds when done in accordance with BSP rules.
So if they follow the rule book, they are completely immune. I can't sue them for the inconvenience or the missed rent payment.
Correct. The law is prioritizing stopping the flow of dirty money over the convenience of the individual transaction. They are protecting the bank from liability so that the bank won't be afraid to pull the trigger and freeze funds when they see something weird.
It's a tough trade-off. We want them to stop the scammers, so we have to give them the power to hit pause on everything. But, man, being on the receiving end of a false positive is going to hurt a lot.
It definitely will. And that's exactly why Section 8 is so interesting to look at next. It's called Coordinated Verification of a Disputed Transaction.
This sounds like the banks actually having to talk to each other for once.
Finally, right. Section 8 mandates that when a dispute happens, the institutions involved, so both the sending bank and the receiving bank, must initiate a coordinated verification process immediately.
Because usually banks just hide behind privacy laws. They say, we can't tell you who owns that receiving account. It's against the law.
Not anymore, they can't. Section 8 has a very specific and powerful override clause. It explicitly says the provisions of RA 1405, which is the Bank Secrecy Law, RA 6426, the Foreign Currency Deposit Act, and this is the really big one, RA 10173, the Data Data Privacy Act shall not apply during the coordinated verification process.
That is the superpower moment for the investigation right there. They could strip away all those privacy protections just to check the transaction.
Only for this specific verification process, yes. But it essentially means the scammer can no longer hide behind the Data Privacy Act while the banks argue with each other. The banks can say, hey, this stolen money went to account X, who exactly is account X? And the other bank can, and by law, must cooperate and tell them.
That leads us perfectly into Section 5 of our outline, which is the watchdog, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. They aren't just a quiet regulator here anymore. They are practically detectives.
Section 12 is titled Investigation and Inquiry into Financial Accounts. It gives the BSP the sweeping authority to investigate accounts involved in any of these prohibited acts.
And does that bank secrecy override apply here too for the BSP?
Explicitly, Section 12 repeats the entire list. Bank secrecy, foreign currency, secrecy, data privacy, none of them apply to the BSP's investigation under this specific act.
This is incredibly significant because, as many know, the Philippines has some of the strictest bank secrecy laws in the entire world. RA 1405 is famous for being incredibly hard to pierce.
It is legendary for that. And AFASA effectively punches a massive hole right through it for scam investigations. The BSP can look straight inside the account.
And it says here in the text, no court below the Court of Appeals shall have jurisdiction to enjoin the BSP.
That's a very legal way of saying you can't just get a temporary restraining order from your friendly local judge to stop this investigation. If the BSP wants to investigate, only the second highest court in the land can tell them to stop. It fundamentally prevents scammers from using cheap legal delay tactics.
We also have Section 13, right? Cybercrime warrants.
Yes. The BSP can apply for cybercrime warrants regarding electronic communications. And they don't even have to do it alone. They can call on the NBI and the PNP for help.
So the central bank is actively sharing financial info with the police.
Section 14 allows that sharing, but Section 15 immediately puts up a very strict guardrail to balance it out.
I was going to ask about that, because if the BSP can see everything and they share it with the police, is my private financial data just floating around government offices now?
Section 15 states that bank officials, government employees, or anyone who gets this info is strictly prohibited from disclosing such information for purposes other than those mentioned.
So if a bank employee sees my info during an investigation and, say, leaks it to the press or uses it to blackmail me,
that is a severe crime in itself under Section 16G. They could face 1 to 5 years in prison just for leaking the info. The privacy veil is lifted only for the investigation, not for anything else.
It's a controlled breach of privacy. Necessary perhaps to fight the syndicates, but definitely something we need to watch very closely.
It absolutely creates a powerful surveillance capability that is highly focused on fraud.
Now let's shift gears and talk about the human element. We mentioned earlier that some scammers are actually victims themselves, the human trafficking aspect.
This is a deeply compassionate and crucial part of the law, Section 20. Immunity of trafficked persons.
Because we've all heard the horror stories. People are promised legitimate jobs in tech support abroad. Their passports are confiscated upon arrival, and they are physically forced to work in these massive scam farms.
Exactly. Under the old rules, or without this specific clause, those trafficked people are technically committing social engineering. They are the ones physically sending the texts or making the calls. But Section 20 says victims of trafficking generally shall be free from criminal liability for acts committed as a direct result of being trafficked.
Do they need to prove it in a lengthy court battle? Like, do they need to get their traffickers convicted first before they are cleared?
No. That's the most important part of this section. It says conviction shall not be a prerequisite. It says they just need to show clear and convincing evidence based on victim identification guidelines.
That is huge for human rights.
Yeah.
It means we don't treat the hostages as the bad guys. We save the punishment for the guys holding the guns and running the syndicates.
Correct. And speaking of punishment, let's go back to the penalties in Section 16 because they are tiered in a very interesting and deliberate way.
We mentioned the life imprisonment for economic sabotage earlier, but what about the quote-unquote regular crimes?
For standard money muling under Section 4A, it's imprisonment of 6 to 8 years, plus substantial fines.
6 to 8 years. That's a significant chunk of your life just for selling your Gcash account for a few hundred pesos.
It really is. For social engineering under Section 4B, it's even higher, 10 to 12 years.
Reflecting that the actual act of deceiving someone is seen as more malicious than just moving the money around after the fact.
Exactly. But then there is a specific aggravating circumstance. If the victim is a senior citizen.
Oh, really? That's specifically written into the law.
Yes. Section 16B. If the target or victim of the scam is a senior citizen, the penalty jumps from the standard 10 to 12 years up to 12 to 14 years.
Good. I think everyone listening can agree with that wholeheartedly. Scammers targeting the elderly are just the absolute lowest of the low.
The law totally agrees with you. It adds extra years just for that specific predatory behavior.
There is also a penalty for malicious reporting, which is in Section 11.
This is essentially the anti-troll measure. If you report someone's account as suspicious just to mess with them, say out of malice or bad faith, and their funds get held up, you can go to prison for 1 to 5 years.
So definitely don't weaponize the new kill switch against your ex-partner.
Definitely not a good idea.
Finally, we have Section 17, which deals with civil forfeiture.
This is standard for criminal law, but still very important. The government can seize the tools of the trade, computers, phones, servers, network equipment. If it was used in the crime, they take it. And of course, they seize assets for the restitution of the stolen money.
So stepping back and looking at the big picture here, we have a law that defines the crimes broadly, even making selling accounts illegal. It creates a terrifying new super crime called economic sabotage with life imprisonment. It forces banks to pay up if their security sucks. It allows banks to freeze funds on your suspicion, and it lets the central bank completely ignore bank secrecy to investigate.
That is an excellent summary. It is a highly comprehensive and very aggressive framework.
It feels like the Wild West of digital finance is finally getting a sheriff. But you know, sheriffs bring rules, and rules always bring friction.
That is the ultimate trade-off here. For you, the listener, the relevance of this law is basically twofold. One, you have vastly more protection. If you are scammed and the bank was negligent, you now have a clear legal path to getting your money back. That is huge.
But two,
you are inevitably going to face more scrutiny. Your everyday transactions might get flagged. Accounts might get frozen temporarily while the AI figures things out. You will likely have to do more two-factor authentication. The era of seamless, instant, frictionless banking might be dialing back a bit in favor of verified, secure, monitored banking.
It's the end of the move fast and break things era for fintech in the Philippines. Now it's move carefully or go to jail.
And move carefully or pay the customer back out of your own pocket.
Before we sign off today, I want to leave you with a thought. We spent some time talking about Section 8 and Section 12, the way this law completely overrides the Data Privacy Act and bank secrecy laws when an investigation is triggered.
It effectively erodes the concept of absolute financial privacy.
Exactly. For decades, the whole Swiss-style bank secrecy thing was completely sacrosanct here. Nobody could look at your account. Now, in the name of safety, the government and the banks can see a whole lot more. So here is the question for you to ponder. In a world overrun by digital syndicates and life-ruining scams, is the end of total financial privacy the necessary price we have to pay for the safety of our savings?
It is really the ultimate question of the digital age. Liberty versus security.
Something to mull over the next time you get an unexpected OTP.
Or a suspicious text message in the middle of the night.
That's it for this deep dive into Republic Act 1210, the AFASA law. Stay safe out there, watch your notifications, and please don't sell your accounts.
And keep your passwords strictly to yourself.
Catch you on the next one.
Welcome to the debate. Imagine this. You wake up on a Tuesday, you check your phone, and your life savings are gone, just wiped out. You call your bank, panic rising in your throat, and they tell you, sorry, you clicked a link, it's your fault, we really can't help you.
Yeah, it's a nightmare scenario, and a painfully common one.
Exactly. For decades, that has been the definitive end of the story for thousands of Filipinos, but the rules of engagement just changed. Today, we are dissecting Republic Act number 12010, the Anti-Financial Account Scamming Act, or AFSA. We're looking at the tension between the state's urgent need to curb rampant digital fraud and the potential erosion of our financial privacy and due process. I'll be arguing that this act is a necessary, frankly overdue modernization of our legal framework. It crucially shifts liability to the banks and provides the armor our financial system desperately needs.
And I'll be taking the position that while the goal of stopping scammers is absolutely noble, the act itself creates a dangerous overreach. Specifically, it grants financial institutions and the state excessive, largely unchecked power to surveil accounts and freeze assets. We are essentially trading our privacy for a sense of security that might be much more expensive than we realize.
Expensive. I mean, what's actually expensive is a digital crime wave that is bleeding the economy dry. Look, this law finally stops the bleeding. It shifts the liability, it modernizes the tech requirements, and it actually punishes the syndicates operating in the shadows. Under Section 2, the state has a definitive duty to protect the public from cybercriminals. And Section 6, this is the breakthrough. Section 6 holds the institutions accountable. Banks, e-wallets, everyone regulated by the BSP.
On the hook? Yes, provided they failed to do their job.
Upgrades because it costs money. Now the law mandates they employ adequate risk management systems. We're talking about multi-factor authentication, MFA, and fraud management systems, FMS. If a scam happens and the bank didn't have these systems running effectively, they have to pay the victim back. And the kicker? Conviction of the scammer is not a prerequisite to the restitution of funds. You don't have to wait 10 years for a court verdict. If the bank messed up, the bank pays. It's a massive victory for consumer protection.
I'm certainly not arguing against holding banks accountable. If they are negligent, they absolutely should pay. But my primary concern in this position is that, in their panic to avoid that very liability, banks are going to tighten the screws on legitimate users. The definition of a financial account in Section 3 is incredibly broad. It's not just your traditional savings account, it's your e-wallet, your credit card, your investment apps. It covers the entire digital footprint of a citizen.
As it must. Scammers don't discriminate.
Sure. But when you cast a net that wide, you catch a lot of dolphins with the tuna. My focus is on Section 7, which grants these institutions the authority to temporarily hold the funds of a disputed transaction for up to 30 days. This allows private companies to freeze assets based on their own internal, opaque, reasonable ground to believe a transaction is unusual. They bypass immediate judicial oversight. And to facilitate this, Sections 8 and 12 practically suspend privacy protections like the Data Privacy Act and the Bank Secrecy Law.
Well, let's unpack that because we need to define what these scammers are actually doing before we criticize the tools used to stop them. Let's look at the money muling provisions in Section 4. This is vital. Before AFASA, we couldn't easily prosecute the people who rented their accounts to syndicates. Now, Section 4A explicitly criminalizes buying, renting, selling, or lending an account. We are finally targeting the infrastructure of the theft.
It's the word lend that keeps me up at night. Section 4A1 prohibits allowing the use of a financial account. Now let's be real about the cultural context here. We have a deeply communal culture. It is standard practice for a mother to let her daughter use her e-wallet to pay for school supplies. It is entirely common for a freelancer to let a cousin who doesn't have a bank account use theirs to receive a legitimate remittance. Under a strict reading of this law, that allowing of use is the first step toward a criminal charge.
I think you are ignoring the intent clause there. The law specifies it's a crime if it's done for the purpose of obtaining proceeds that are known to be derived from crimes. The mother lending her account for school supplies isn't doing it to launder money. She doesn't know it's from a crime because it isn't. The target here is the person selling their verified account credentials online for 500 pesos so a syndicate can move stolen funds. It also clearly defines social engineering in Section 4B. Using deception to get sensitive info. That covers the phishing aspect. We are closing the legal loopholes.
But knowledge in a court of law is a very tricky thing to prove or disprove. Let's say I lend my account to my cousin. He tells me he's doing a legitimate side hustle, maybe selling sneakers online. Money comes in, I withdraw it for him. Turns out, the sneaker sales were actually phishing proceeds. I didn't know in the colloquial sense, but an aggressive prosecutor could argue I should have known or that I was willfully blind. Suddenly, I'm not a helpful cousin. I'm a money mule facing ruin.
That is a defense strategy for a courtroom, not a fundamental flaw in the legislation. Look, if you are facilitating the movement of dirty money, you are part of the problem. We cannot leave a massive loophole for I didn't know when people are willfully, industrially renting out their identities.
We are closing the loop by tightening the noose around everyone's neck. And if you think I'm exaggerating, look at the severity of the penalties in Section 16. This isn't a slap on the wrist.
It shouldn't be. These crimes destroy people's lives.
But life imprisonment? Really? Section 16C outlines economic sabotage. If these acts are committed by a syndicate, which is defined merely as a group of 3 or more persons, it carries a penalty of life imprisonment.
Economic sabotage. That sounds entirely appropriate for syndicates draining millions from the economy.
But again, the definition of a syndicate here is just 3 or more persons. Let's play this out. Imagine 3 college students living in a dorm. Roommate A opens a digital bank account. Roommate B convinces him to let them use it to receive some crypto gains from an online job. Roommate C helps them cash it out at an ATM. It turns out the crypto job was a scam operation.
Then they participated in a scam. They moved stolen money.
But look at the math. 3 people conspiring to use an account that hits the threshold for economic sabotage. We are talking about sending 3 19-year-olds to prison for the rest of their natural lives. No parole, treated the exact same as a terrorist or a cartel leader. Does that sound proportionate to you? A naive mistake in college could literally end your life.
You are painting these hypothetical students as innocent babes in the woods. If 3 people are coordinating to move stolen funds, that is a cell. That is a criminal enterprise. Maybe a judge decides they don't deserve life based on mitigating factors, but they certainly don't deserve a free pass. And you're conveniently ignoring the flip side of Section 16. Look at 16b. The penalty automatically goes up if the victim is a senior citizen.
I saw that, yes. That is the heart of this law. It's not about locking up naive students. It's about protecting our grandparents. We know syndicates specifically target the elderly because they are often less tech-savvy. The law says, if you prey on the vulnerable, the state will come down on you with everything it has. That is absolute moral clarity.
I'm all for protecting the vulnerable, but we can achieve that without creating a rigid legal framework where 3 roommates can be charged with economic sabotage. The punishment must fit the crime. Life imprisonment for financial fraud where no physical violence occurred is draconian. It signals that the state cares more about the bank's balance sheets than human liberty.
It signals that the state recognizes that financial stability is a matter of national security. If people lose faith in the banking system because they get scammed every week, the economy collapses. That is the definition of sabotage.
Well, speaking of the banking system, let's move to the power this law gives them to freeze your money. Section 7. This is the protective custody argument you brought up earlier.
Yes, the temporary holding of funds. It is arguably the most critical tool in the box.
I argue it is a license to kill a citizen's cash flow. Section 7 allows an institution to hold funds for up to 30 days if they consider a transaction disputed. And the criteria?
If the transaction is unusual, without clear economic purpose, or from an unknown source.
Which makes perfect sense. If money starts flying out of an account in a way that doesn't match the user's historical profile, the bank should stop it, freeze it immediately. But unusual is entirely subjective. Let's take a freelancer, a graphic designer. She usually gets paid 20,000 pesos a month. Suddenly, she lands a massive project from a new corporate client and gets wired 200,000 pesos. To the bank's fraud management system, that algorithm you praised earlier, that is highly unusual. It's from an unknown source, the new client. Boom, the account is frozen.
For verification, she just has to prove it's a legitimate payment.
For up to 30 days. She has rent due in 3 days. She has to buy groceries. She calls the bank and they say, sorry, under Section 7 of AFASA, we are holding this for investigation. She can't access her own hard-earned money. She defaults on her rent. She gets hit with late fees. And the bank, they have zero liability for the collateral damage caused by that freeze as long as they had quote-unquote reasonable ground.
You are arguing for the exception again, the edge case. Look at it this way. The alternative is that the 200,000 pesos was actually stolen from someone else. If the bank didn't freeze it, it would be in an offshore crypto wallet 5 minutes later. Once digital money leaves the ecosystem, it is gone forever. The hold is the only way to recover funds. It's a necessary pause button. And the law explicitly says the institution must notify the BSP promptly. It's not done in the dark.
But you have to consider the incentive structure here. Section 9 puts banks on the hook if they fail to freeze fraud. So if you are a bank manager or a compliance officer, are you going to risk letting a transaction go through? No. You are going to freeze everything that looks even slightly weird. You will de-risk. We are going to see a massive increase in legitimate accounts being locked because banks are terrified of that Section 9 liability.
That's why Section 10 penalizes the improper holding of funds. They can't just freeze everything willy-nilly without consequence. And Section 11 punishes malicious reporting.
If someone tries to weaponize this law to freeze a competitor's account by filing a fake report, they go to jail. There are structural checks and balances built into the text.
Administrative checks against immediate financial ruin. It's a completely asymmetric risk for the consumer. But let's move to what I consider the deepest cut in this law, the privacy issue. With AFASA, we are effectively saying goodbye to bank secrecy.
Sections 12, 13, and 14. And I say, finally.
Finally, we are shredding Republic Act 1405. Section 12 gives the BSP the power to inquire into accounts involved in the commission of a prohibited act. And it explicitly states that the Bank Secrecy Law and the Data Privacy Act shall not apply.
Good. Bank secrecy has become a shield for criminals. You cannot investigate a modern digital crime if you are legally blindfolded by laws written decades ago.
But it's not just the bank account ledger. Section 13 brings in cybercrime warrants. The BSP can apply for warrants to look at electromagnetic communications. That's your emails, your text messages, your DMs. And Section 14 allows for information sharing between banks, the BSP, and law enforcement. We are quietly building a massive surveillance apparatus under the guise of fraud prevention.
You're making it sound like government agents are sitting in a room reading your diary. This is strictly for coordinated verification under Section 8. Here is the reality of how these scams actually work. The money jumps. It goes from Bank A to e-wallet B to Bank C in seconds. In the old system, the investigation hit a brick wall at Bank A because Bank A couldn't legally tell Bank B anything. The privacy laws actively protected the flow of stolen money. Section 8 allows the banks to talk to each other. Hey, this stolen $50,000 just moved to your system. Freeze it. You cannot stop a network if the nodes aren't allowed to communicate.
So we burn down the village to save it. We destroy the fundamental right to privacy to stop petty theft.
We limit privacy in specific, targeted instances to stop organized crime.
But once that door is open, it never closes. Today, the BSP can look at your texts and bank details for financial scams. What happens in 5 years when the definition of a prohibited act subtly expands? What if unusual economic activity starts to include donating to a political opposition group or buying books the state doesn't approve of? We are removing the judicial barrier. The BSP becomes an investigator with unprecedented access to financial data.
It is not warrantless access. Section 13 literally says they must apply for a cybercrime warrant for the communications. A judge is still involved. The only warrantless part is the financial inquiry under Section 12, which is strictly limited to the money flow of a disputed transaction. And frankly, if I'm a victim, I want the BSP to be able to see where my money went right now, not after a 3-day court hearing when the money is already converted to Bitcoin and gone.
And that is the exact crux of our disagreement. We are prioritizing speed over liberty. We are trusting that the BSP and the police will only use these massive sweeping powers for good. But look at Section 15, the prohibition on disclosure. It is an incredibly weak safeguard. It basically just says they can't leak the info. Great. But history consistently tells us that data collected by the state eventually leaks or gets used for leverage. We are creating a permanent treasure trove of data on every citizen who has ever had a disputed transaction.
The alternative is the status quo. A world where we have pristine, untouched privacy laws and a banking system that functions as a playground for thieves. I would much rather have a secure system where the BSP can trace a fraudster's transaction than a perfectly private system where I lose my life savings and have no recourse.
It's a very compelling argument, right up until you are the one flagged by the algorithm. Until your account is frozen because you bought a secondhand car, or your private texts are read because you accidentally sent money to the wrong Gcash number.
That's exactly why we have the courts, to resolve those disputes.
Courts that are notoriously slow, incredibly expensive, and often completely inaccessible to the poor. Which brings us to the Implementing Rules and Regulations, or the IIR.
Yes, Section 23.
The law is passed, but the real details, the actual how, of this massive undertaking are yet to be written. The BSP, the DOJ, and other agencies have 1 year to draft these rules.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. How they define unusual, how they structure the verification process, how they build the appeal system for a frozen account. That will ultimately determine if this law operates as a protective shield or a weapon of mass financial surveillance.
I completely agree with you there. The IRR needs to be incredibly precise. It needs to ensure that the graphic designer you mentioned has a clear, fast, and free path to unfreeze her funds if she proves they are legitimate.
And it needs to ensure that 3 college students don't get handed life in prison for a foolish mistake.
We've certainly covered a lot of ground today.
We have, and I think anyone listening can clearly see why this is such a deeply contentious piece of legislation.
To summarize my stance, RA 120101 is strong medicine, but we are a sick patient. The digital fraud epidemic is an existential threat to the fundamental trust in our economy. By forcing banks to adopt FMS and MFA, and by severely criminalizing the money mule infrastructure, we are finally fighting back. The loss of absolute bank secrecy is simply the price of admission for a secure digital world.
And my conclusion remains that the price is simply too high. We are correcting a failure of law enforcement by deputizing private banks to act as judges and stripping citizens of their fundamental right to privacy in the process. The potential for abuse from freezing legitimate funds to the overzealous prosecution of minor participants is terrifying. We are essentially building a panopticon just to catch a pickpocket.
It's a debate that will undoubtedly continue as the IRR is drafted and the very first cases hit our courts.
Indeed. And I urge everyone to not just take our word for it. Read the law yourself. Watch the IRR process closely. Your money and your privacy genuinely depend on it.
Thank you for joining us for this intellectual exchange.
Until next time.
This has been The Debate.